Participants are just joining in. I'll just give a minute before we start.
You want to moderate the whole thing?
Yes, I'll be there, Balaji. Dev is also on the call. He's stopped this video so that you will be the first to speak, and then they will continue after yours.
Hello, Balaji.
Hi, Dev. Hi. How much time do I have to speak?
You can take about 25 minutes. We'll have a couple of minutes for questions, and then we'll pass it over to Dev. Okay, I think we have enough participants to start, and we're also on time, so I'll just start. So thank you again to all the participants who are continuing to join our webinar series. So I'll just give a context for the people who have just joined for the first time. This is the fourth session in the series that we are doing, and this is focused on innovation leading to IP and the journey related to IP. So the idea behind the series is to encourage organizations across the spectrum, whether they're a startup, they're a researcher, or they are enterprise customers, enterprise organizations who are established in the journey of innovation. We want to encourage that the quality of IPs improve in the country. So that starts with an innovation, and different companies may be in different stages at their innovation, whether they are thinking about filing, haven't filed, the options that they're exploring. And we hope that the series, which brings in both industry experts as well as legal experts at the webinar, give you some idea and insights into how they see it in different technologies. And we have been doing this sectorally, and this is the fourth session. This is highlighting healthcare innovation. We had earlier done in ER&D and space tech, BFSI, and so on, and we'll continue to do the series. So please watch out your inboxes for invites to this. So today our first speaker is Balaji Uppili. He's the Chief Business Officer of Neurealm, which was earlier formerly known as GS Labs and CABS. He has over 32 years of experience in the IT industry, and he has donned multiple hats across different industries. And I think will be the right person to speak about the technology aspect before we move to Dave Robinson, who is a partner and national practice head of intellectual property at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas & Co. Over to you first, Balaji.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Chanmuga and Nasscom. And thank you all for joining for this brief webinar. As we got to hear, Neurealm is in the forefront of supporting technology solutions in healthcare, and that's the topic I'd like to talk. Technology is different in healthcare compared to other industries for three reasons. One, technology needs to take care of primarily, the first and foremost is the data, confidentiality, and data protection, which is primarily from a patient data and patient diagnostic data. That's number one. Number two, lot of the health systems, especially in the US, of course, in India, it's a little different, and I'll come to that in a bit, is believing big time on what we call as COTS, off-the-shelf products, like EMRs, the revenue cycle managements, the billing systems, and so on. And hence, the challenge of data interoperability and challenge of integration is big. Having said that, all of that, it's also a good ground to really bring in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence for a couple of reasons. One, it can directly impact lives. And two, obviously, because we are dealing with a huge amount of data, it is extremely easy to navigate through the data and figure out patterns and come up with some artificial intelligence solutions. And I'll touch on some of that use cases or some of the ones which we've been doing very shortly. Very quickly, between the US and India, from a differentiation perspective of health systems and using technology, in US, as I said, it is lot off-the-shelf products which are used. And I'm sure you're all aware of the various EHR, EMRs, products which are there. And then, of course, the hospital management systems, the billing systems, and so on. Most of it is the COTS products. The biggest challenge there is extremely self-centered data. So data interoperability between systems is a big challenge. That is where you have all the HL7 FHIR type of models to be able to eliminate the data interoperability challenge and have a seamless flow of data. Whereas in India, most of the health systems believe or trust in building their homegrown systems. Very little go for COTS products, which actually again is a problem because data interoperability between one health system and another system is significant. Second, you have the opportunity to protect and hold the patient information. And third, the assets which you're creating belong to you. It doesn't belong to somebody else. So you can also monetize them if you want by giving it to other health systems. That's the larger, broader difference in both the health systems, of course, are. Coming to, because of all of this and because healthcare is primarily and predominantly impacting lives and deals with data, applicability of AI is extremely good. So for the layman and for the people who are non-techies, AI is nothing but figuring out patterns within and insights within the data and use that effectively to take decisions. So patterns could be demographic pattern, patterns could be disease pattern, patterns could be treatment patterns, patterns could be outcomes, and so on, right? And hospital management and so on. So the applicability of AI in all of that data is significant. Now, we have seen three categories of applicability of AI in healthcare. The first one is on normal operational elements in the hospital. Like, for example, in one of the large leading hospitals, we're discussing with them on bed management. When I say bed management, what I meant is that's the biggest challenge, right? People who are coming in for being an inpatient come in wanting to get admitted and figuring out how to move forward with their treatment and surgery or whatever the diagnosis is. But when you come in, you actually look at non-availability of beds because somebody is discharging later in the day, somebody is not discharging for that, dates get extended. So there's a lot of volatility in the whole process. Some may say that don't go to this clinic, go to another clinic where it is available and so on. How do we predict what is the availability of the beds and how can we proactively communicate both to the person who is getting discharged or people who are going to get admitted and take a very efficient call and make it a good experience for them? There is a huge element of using AI to really have that because there are patterns which come out. These types of patients, these types of hospitals, these types of treatments and surgeries which they go through potentially lead to delays or early acceptance and so on. And thereby it supports how we can actually ensure that we are able to manage the bed and availability and utilization of the beds properly. So that's one applicability. Second, in the integrated context of hospital and supply chain, we can definitely predict and potentially keep the costs low of replenishing. And we did that in one of the hospitals in Bangalore, where we are helping them to figure out how to use AI to predict the requirements of inventory and requirements of how the replenishment has to happen into their pharmacy or into their entire supply chain ecosystem so that the costs are lower, yet availability is high, and hence the patient experience goes up. So those are some use cases we're actually seeing when it comes to hospital management solutions. When it comes to really the clinical part of things, that's where the applicability of AI is even more significant. Clinical part of it varies a lot, right? From actually predicting your organ function, predicting what could be the potential outcome of a diagnosis versus using the collateral and the data, both radiology as well as pathological data, to be able to provide recommendations to the doctors or experts so that they can conclude the conversation faster and spend more time with the patient, explaining what is needed and so on. That is the second. The third one, which is actually catching up worldwide, is hospital-acquired infections. A lot of patients suffer from infections coming out of hospitals. A lot of patients are having ramifications of the treatment and the ambience which is there in the hospital, especially when it's an inpatient. How do we ensure that AI can actually predict based on your treatment plan, based on your prognosis, based on the hospital conditions, based on the medicines which you're using, and the happenings in the hospital, how can we predict whether you are susceptible for a UTI, for a sepsis, or whatever it is, right? Those are very significant. And we've actually piloted this in a couple of hospitals in the US. And the predictable rate or the response rate accuracy is about 85 to 90%, which actually is a good thing for the doctor or the nurse to take action and figure out how to avoid the hospital-acquired infections. The one which is actually advanced now is actual diagnosis itself, AI being used in diagnosis. I'm sure a lot of you have read that by scanning the eye, the optics nerve, you're able to, or the iris, you're able to predict what is the performance of a lot of the organs, especially sugar, especially kidneys, and so on. So that's an element which has happened. It's actually live in one of the leading ophthalmological hospitals in India, and we were part of that. The second one, which is catching up in a very big way, is in the areas of oncology, is in the areas of other neurological and other disorders, where people are able to predict, one, based on the prognosis, based on the diagnostic information, what are potential challenges which can face in the actual issue itself, the specialty issue, and two, what treatment can bring what types of behavior, and success rate is also being predicted. Now, again, all of this is as good or as bad as the data being used. So if the data is not perfect, if the data is old, if the data is not fresh and not scrubbed properly, then your ability to get the right insights is actually very bad. Second, if there is a lot of data and you throw a lot of data, AI can actually get into hallucination. It can actually start figuring out situations which may never actually happen. And we will try to find solutions to hypotheses which are never going to happen. So that is second thing which we need to really address. And the most important thing which we need to address, especially because it's healthcare, is the security of the data. So the governance around how AI can actually apply itself and demonstrate insights and interpretations is an extremely important aspect of AI. There are many methodologies which are there, especially because it is needed to follow HIPAA, PHI, and DPDP standards in India as well, to ensure that safety of the patients and safety of patient information is provided. Now, what does this lead to? This leads to few things. Definitely, the patient is in the center of everything, so that he or she can get a great experience. So that is going to benefit the patient, and hence it is going to benefit their ability to take a treatment and get well and have a better lifespan and lifestyle. That's number one for sure. So AI definitely is going to help there. Yesterday, I was in a conversation with a large hospital, and they were talking about telling me, how do I help doctors to scan through multiple and zillions of images and be able to do a prediction or a diagnosis of a particular image of a patient and provide the actual diagnosis. It was sounding very simple, but when we really looked at it, it was 12 years of data which we were trying to work through and navigate through and create some models to be able to provide a generative AI solution so that the doctor can now apply it into the diagnosis. The challenge there we felt was the limitation of the data, the limitation of technology, and the limitation of our ability to even think of a model which may actually have not arrived. And those were things we are trying to solve. What I'm trying to tell you is AI not only is able to make your life easier or better, it's also going to make you aspirational and inspirational to do a lot more than what we may not have thought through. Number two. Number three, most important, it can go back to as many data as possible. A human brain might not be able to decipher something which has happened 200, 300 years back. But we did see some collateral of medicine recently in one of the hospitals in the US, which was about 200 years old. And there was some lovely information which was secured there. And we thought it would be good for doing that. So that's another advantage which we have seen. Lastly, but not the least one, however, lot of these pharmaceutical companies, which are also part of AI, healthcare, are applying AI in a very big way. One of these examples is we are working with a very, very large pharma giant in the US, where we are applying AI to actually manufacture based on the R&D data of the SKUs and manufacture the data, ship the data as SKUs either through ocean or through air, depending on the lifespan of the SKUs, and figure out how the last mile is going to happen so that it reaches faster at lower price, yet doesn't have the impact of environment and other challenges which it may happen during the journey. AI is being used there, and we're able to save a lot of money for both the patient as well as the hospitals. What I would, in conclusion, talk briefly about is one, AI is here to stay, but AI has a good applicability in our lives. It can impact our lives in a very positive manner. It can impact our lives in being able to live better, have a healthy life, and be suggestive as an augmented one for the doctors to make the experience of the patient better, number one. Number two, expedite the diagnosis, potential treatment, and success of the treatment faster than before. And three, it is actually leading into creating these digital twins, leading into creating some newer models which were not predicted even earlier, because of which either you can invent a newer way of life, or you can invent a newer device, or you can invent a newer healthy lifestyle for the patient to live happily and live better. I can keep talking because some of these are very, very practical, and some of these are actually applied both in the India and the US context. But submission is look at AI for patient care, enhancing patient care, making the doctor's life better, and making the hospital worthy of the patient coming in there. Do not look at AI as a replacement to human beings. Do not look at AI as anything can be solved by AI. And do not look at AI saying that there are negatives of AI. There are methods to put guardrails and governance around AI to be able to deliver outcomes which are useful for the patient, the doctor, and the hospital. Kavya, I would like to take any questions if there are any before I continue on my last piece of my conversation, which is a little more innovative in nature.
Open to questions, participants. Please feel free to raise your hands. You have the option in the bottom, or you can also drop your question. In the meanwhile, I would just like to highlight a question, Balaji.
Please.
You made a perfect point when you talked about the quality of data. I think that hits the bullseye there. And you also talked about AI in diagnosis. I just wanted to check what is the adoption for this in India as well as compared to Western countries where predominantly many of the healthcare solutions get applied from India.
I mean, good question. I think the adoption in healthcare itself in general is low compared to other industries. The reason is people still need to believe and trust the outcomes from an AI closer to what a human being runs. It's a very emotional business, right? I like my doctor to touch my hand, see into my eyes, and communicate what I need to do or what I need not do. All of a sudden, making a device or a script or something which is invisible to help drive some of those conversations or drive some of those conclusions is not an easily acceptable aspect in healthcare. But I understand pharma and medical devices, there is a lot more of innovation happening using AI, which is also part of healthcare. But even payers, there's a lot of revenue cycle management, there is a lot of reclaims and other things being addressed by AI. But when it comes to healthcare provider space, I think it's still a long way to go. India is a little more lesser compared to the Western world in terms of adoption. But even there, it is not as significant as it is probably in a manufacturing sector or a retail sector, or for that matter, even BFSI sector and tourism sectors, right? It's a little slow, and it will remain slow because I think there needs to be a lot more proof points for people to believe in it. Because at the end of the day, when I'm going to put my life at risk, will I be able to believe in it? And that's how it question comes to. Having said that, I think the doctors are starting to believe in it. Doctors feel it's a good aid for them, and hopefully they'll be the best change agent to convince the patient rather than technology and the hospitals themselves.
You also spoke a little bit about governance. I wanted to understand how do you see that both from here as well as elsewhere. How is governance playing a part? Of course, I'll also ask Dev on the regulatory concerns, but please do highlight a bit since you also spoke about that.
See, one thing, I think it's just the general problem of AI, but more specifically because it's healthcare. One thing which is really coming out is that with all these large language models and stuff being spoken about, there's a potential that your data can get exposed to others, number one. Number two, you could potentially be importing data which is not the right data, which is not matching your data. So there is both ways there could be a potential constraint or a challenge in the data protection as well as how the intelligent insights come out of. There are mechanisms to create a global LLM versus a local LLM, get the best practices for global LLM, but try to drive it from a local LLM. There are many mechanisms. All the AI tools and others are also coming up with guardrails and addressing the regulatory requirements. So there are mechanisms are there, but in healthcare, which is very stringent with regards to data and confidentiality with HIPAA, PHI, and DPDP, it is far more important that that's a mainstream and that's not an afterthought. But there are mechanisms to do it in multiple ways, both technology-wise and process-wise.
Okay. Thanks for that, Balaji. I think Somdatta has a question. I have.
Hi, Somdatta, please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Balaji.
Hello.
Just give me.
Yes, an echo.
Yeah, some echo, right? Just give me.
Yeah,
a
now
second.
it's not there. I think you can proceed with your question.
Okay. Okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. The talk was very informative and interesting. So I just had a basic question. I mean, what are the kind of challenges that you have faced during the cross-border transfer of data or the digital twin that you mentioned, legal or otherwise?
One, thank you for that, Somdatta. One, it is not a prevalent acceptance at all right now for cross-border data transfer for digital twins. People want homegrown, people want heterogeneous data from within to be used for digital twins. Second, most importantly, is the same challenge as what the data interoperability is facing, right? The systems are so isolated and so siloed that interoperability is continuing to become a big challenge, even between medical devices. Look at a Siemens instrument versus a Philips versus a Panasonic or versus some other equipment. The data is not easily transferable, not just the machine data, but the outcome data is not easily transferable. So data interoperability is still a barrier. So digital twin, I would say in healthcare, it's of course there in multiple other industries. In healthcare, it's very nascent and people are figuring out the challenges of success, challenges of the data which can support or not support the digital twin, and more importantly, pilot it for effectiveness. But it will happen because I think experts are working on figuring out to remove some of those barriers. We are ourselves creating a data lakehouse for one of the large health systems where we are actually eliminating the whole data interoperability and addressing normalized data so that the data quality and data freshness is very high. Once that gets cleared and once regulatory allows you to do data interoperability and data transfer across systems, I think we should be good.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Sonu Dakar, how enterprises are working to convert their data to data ready for AI. Very important. First and foremost, data should be right. And that is irrespective of AI, right? Even if you have to generate static data, even if you have to generate static reports, the data should be right. That is important. Then comes the other aspects of how do we scrub it? How do we ensure that there is a generalized, normalized way of doing it and are able to create that value which AI can do it? So there are what is called as preload mechanisms in AI, right? For the models to work. There is integrity, like we have typical integrity in our RDBMS. We also have integrity challenges and prerequisites for AI. We'll have to convert it into that particular format. And most importantly, use the healthcare specific data of HL7 and FHIR or any other mechanisms to be able to support or normalize data so that AI can effectively work on it. But it's still a challenge. We don't have a clear-cut solution for that. Image data transfer has no issue. DICOM standard is there, Sukanta, I agree. But the problem is not the DICOM standard. DICOM standard is restricting to the machine information. I am talking of output information from the devices, which are for a particular hospital, for a particular prognosis, is different from another health system data. That is what I'm referring to. DICOM standard is there. It's not just for image data transfer for healthcare. It's there for general image data transfer itself. But I'm referring to the data which is an outcome of the processing of the devices or the images which need to be transferred to some other machine or some other device, either to enable digital twin or the patient going to some other hospital to take a different type of a treatment or second opinion. That's what I'm referring to, but I agree to your point on DICOM. Yes, Dave, you have raised your hand.
Yes. So Balaji, this is like really useful, and you kind of like brought it up on a standards thing. And this is again, Sukant has already taken, notice of that. I wanted to actually, understand from you, because there's a problem already happening on regarding interoperability of data. Is there talk about actually setting standards, setting up an SSO, standard setting organization? Because it seems to be such a waste that you actually have data lying around, ostensibly to actually massively have an incremental effect on outputs, but they're not interoperable.
No, there are. So it started off with the fire standard and HL7 standard. It's going even further. Now the systems which are there, especially the hyperscalers, which are currently playing a big role in creating these data lakehouses, they've actually come up with interoperable formats. So there is an acknowledgement of that limitation, which has inhibited the health systems, especially outside of India, to be able to communicate with each other and communicate best practice across each other. So Fire was one which started. Then came the HL series. HL7 is the latest, and it's further going to come up with newer models. The Chime and other organizations are working towards figuring out how to make it even more easier for data interoperability. It is a recognition which has definitely happened without violating the HIPAA, PHI, and DPDP norms, which are working on DAVE. It is there to a large extent compared to what it was a couple of years back, but we are still seeing challenges, and that's being worked out. There are forums which are actually addressing this at government level, at institution levels as well, Dave.
Understood. That is fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Balaji. I think we are on time. If there are any questions, I'll drop email IDs at the end of the session, and maybe we'll connect with you if there are any further questions.
Sure, Kavit. Thank you. Really appreciate the
Thank you
opportunity.
so much.
Thank you very much. Really, this was fascinating.
Thank you so much for the insightful.
Happy to take things forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Balaji. Now I would like to call Dev. So just giving us a brief introduction on Dev. Dev, as I mentioned, is a partner and a national practice head for intellectual property at Shardul Amarchand and Mangaldas company. Primarily, his expertise licensing. He's also worked on in India as well as other jurisdictions in patent prosecutions. And he has also had practice expertise in different fields, including pharmaceuticals, which I think will be the focus today. So over to you, Dev. Please do share your presentation. I'll just check if it's coming up. I can see your first screen.
Hello.
Yes, Dev, we can hear and see your screen.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, this is kind of like, sets up a very interesting stage, because Balaji kind of like, took on an area which kind of like leaps forward by several leaps and bounds, and things to come in future. And I'm going to talk about intellectual property in this space. And as we all know, that law moves slowly. So, while I haven't put in too much material on what's the role of AI and how AI is going to be treated on the intellectual property front, I'm happy to talk about it. The brief out here was basically, to see how, medium and small scale enterprises need to look at intellectual property and kind of like begin to, make the most of it, what to understand of this beast, and how does intellectual property actually interface with what we're all most interested about is generating revenue, money. So it's firstly, I think the most important part of actually understanding intellectual property is not looking at it as if you have intellectual property, you are going to actually add value, or that if you have intellectual property, then you will be kind of like relevant in the market. It's the other way around. is like making money itself. You don't make money because you want to make money. You make money because you come up with something that people are going to value it in money terms and exchange it for money. Intellectual property is pretty much the same thing. It's a consequence. It cannot really actually be an objective. And that is really, really important to understand, especially from a workshop, research, and development point of view, from an engineering point of view. Intellectual property is basically those kinds of, you know, you know, innovations, inventions, creations that the law recognizes that once they've been made, then the person who's actually created them gets some sort of exclusivity over it. But the important thing to remember is in generation of intellectual property, you know, it is really what you're talking about is generating an intellectual capital within an enterprise. Okay, so not all intellectual capital that one creates becomes intellectual property, but it's nearly impossible to actually begin to generate intellectual property, without actually building up a capital. So it's only a small part of the capital that actually becomes intellectual property. So what is then intellectual capital? Intellectual capital, we could probably divide into two parts. Other than what we are saying out here, you can kind of like structure it another way, which is basically what resides in the minds, heads, and the collective intellect of an enterprise versus that which is reducible to a record form. So which is what the first point is all about, the collective memory or records of an enterprise. And that is capable of generating revenue. And that will then include your intellectual assets and property. And the way we actually distinguish assets from property is asset is something which is valuable and property is something which is protectable. So in assets, there are certain other kinds that, let's say, for example, database, distribution networks, business methods, and know-how, which are basically, how would you call, competitive advantages. So this is a space that we see a lot of industrial espionage, and many enterprises, especially, I think, the ones who have not suffered at the hands of this, this kind of espionage, are the ones who are most susceptible to it, and they feel the worst effects of it. So and how does this happen? This espionage, it happens on by two basic methods. One is when a competitor actually goes out looking for your competitive advantages and try and incorporate it into their own so as to be able to compete with you, in an unethical fashion that they were not able to compete with you earlier. And the other one is through employee attrition. It is shocking how much intellectual assets get lost on account of an enterprise not putting proper checks and balances in place, and employees basically, I don't even think many a times employees know that they are actually doing something, which is wrong. They just feel that this is there for the taking and they take it. So if one were to look at it, intellectual capital has two parts of it: intellectual assets and knowledge, skill, experience, ideas, business relationships. And in intellectual assets, there is intellectual property and other tangible, reducible to form competencies. So in statutory intellectual property, you very, very clearly have your statutory laws. And the non-statutory part, is, so what is non-statutory intellectual property? Non-statutory intellectual property is that they've not made any law per se on it, but that's not to say that it's not protectable in law. So these are what we call tortious claims that can be brought against another party for having done something which it ought not to have done, keeping in view honest commercial practices. So this is basically trade secret theft, misappropriation of confidential information, riding on other people's goodwill and reputation, which is more trademark-like, when actually people adopt, trade styles and trade dresses so as to kind of like close in on the competition by taking the advantage that they have created to their own benefit. So if one is looking at intellectual property, I mean, like the number one thing is why are we even getting into this? One of the reasons why this really needs to be addressed and kind of like understood a little profoundly is from the point of view that if one were not to do, then what would one be doing? Okay, if one were not to generate value, which means one remains static, two things are going to happen. Firstly, obsolescence is going to come in very quickly. And let's say, even if obsolescence does not come in, one is operating in a space where, let's say, obsolescence is not possible, theoretically. Okay, then what's going to happen is there are going to be so many people in the place that you're actually not going to be able to make the kind of profits. So when does one actually make money? When a person or an enterprise makes money, when they are differentiating the products or services from others in a fashion that the differentiated service or product can justify additional spend. I mean, there are lots of other reasons that it probably is better in many counts and this, that, and all that. But if one were to look at it in the most basic terms, then there's a justification for it on account of the value that's being derived from it. So intellectual property really is one of those things that you can actually, it's a process. It is more of a process rather than actually an aim. Okay, so the important thing when actually one actually deals with intellectual property and kind of like looks at driving value is to see, on how is it that some are able to do this better than others and move ahead, while others kind of like struggle. And yet there's another category that, while is doing, good research and development and creating value in its products and services, is not valuing it correctly, which means it's discounting its own efforts, irrespective of the fact, whether they are good or not. I mean, the number of times that we've heard inventors say, we did this, but we didn't think it was such a big deal, because it was obvious to us. Just because it was obvious to you doesn't mean it is obvious to everyone. But at an enterprise level, if one were to look at generating value as really that of a process, okay, then issues come with respect to how does an enterprise create the mindset, culture, behavior, an attitude, and a certain kind of restlessness, which I call, a felt want or need, as a pervading way of looking at things, as a pervading way of doing things. It is actually this that drives intellectual capital. It is from the intellectual capital then comes out intellectual property. So you can't actually say, I'm going to sit down and invent if you're not in the habit of actually thinking in a particular way. You cannot actually go ahead and make, significant improvements in your products and services if the enterprise does not really have the culture of appreciating it or promoting it, and behavior comes between colleagues as well. I mean, if the attitude and the behavior is more like negative, we don't want to do this. No, it's just not relevant to us, or this is not the direction in which we are going. Then what one will find is that innovation within the enterprise as a collective output is definitely going to go down. So what is interesting is that I think every enterprise innovates. Is the rate of innovation actually that makes it really interesting? Is why, once again, there are within even an enterprise a section of people, who just set a different pace, as opposed to the rest of them. Okay, and that's got to do with just keeping up with the rate of innovation. Not all innovation is going to be useful, but it's just a way of thinking. Okay. Not every innovation is going to be, how would you say, get you forward in your products and services. Something that you've done today, and we've seen this, is something that you've done today, okay, seems to have no relevance today, but something else happens 8 months down the line, and what you had done 8 months earlier and this now suddenly has great relevance, in taking your products and services forward. So basically, once again, it's at an enterprise level, innovation can actually be organizationally driven. Now, there are theories and principles on how one drives innovation in different spaces, you know. So, so innovation can be driven in, let's say, the business environment of things. This, and it can be driven on the engineering side of things. Now, there are different theories, different principles that have come up. I've just put two of them down here, but there are many, many more. I'm not going to go into it in any great length because, as you could probably make out, the TRIZ method utilizes 40 inventive principles. And then you have to talk about contradiction matrices and other tools, etc., which are like, very, very hyper technical way of looking at engineering problems and then coming up with solutions, and likewise in asset, lots and lots of thought has been done, on marketing and management and how to actually go ahead and actually drive outcomes using these methods. So there is always in the healthcare sector a public consideration, a general public health consideration. This is something that we get asked a lot of questions about, you know, um, whether this is something that, innovators need to keep in mind so as to be able to negotiate into or negotiate out of, these paradigms, okay, depending upon the corporate philosophy. Now, I don't think that's the right way to look about it, but it's the right way to look about it is do what you're doing. And even in all of this, balancing of intellectual property, private rights, and public health, the innovator is always supposed to receive reasonable returns should some parts of his intellectual property portfolio, be, statutorily pressed into, areas of service that the enterprise was not typically looking at. And that's kind of like compulsory licensing and voluntary or involuntary licensing and so on and so forth. There is a good part to it as well that, look, if you're not using something, you can put it in a patent pool, and maybe others can benefit from it. But once again, these are one of those things that one talks about, but sees very little come out of it. Not that nothing comes out of it, but little comes out of it. And fair enough, that is your contribution, as far as leaving something on the table is concerned. Now, as far as the benefits, of intellectual property is concerned, I mean, like, this is all about it. The 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 most important thing is you've kind of like when you actually have an intellectual property portfolio, by definition, then you actually have some engineering, technical solutions and services and or products that are distinguishing you from the market. Okay, the intellectual property portfolio of yours around that ensures that other people can't actually come and begin to scavenge upon the hard work that you've already done. So by that token in itself, it encourages investment, because patents are actually granted the monopoly in exchange of disclosure. It sets up a new standard of the state of the art upon which others can innovate. That is basically the idea, and on the other side, it is your branding and quality control, paradigms that seriously go ahead and secure for yourself a market identity, which then once again drives your value. So some best practices that one actually looks at when one is, looking at the intellectual property space, okay, is, I think, one's portfolio acquisition strategy. And this is actually quite a complicated cat and mouse game, and let me explain why I think so. The reason for that is that acquiring intellectual property is a tedious, time-taking, and even expensive a process. The thing is, do you actually want to be devoting that much time, space, and money for this within the enterprise? Or maybe this is not one of those innovations, or these are not one of those innovations that you actually want to protect in this way and kind of like just keep it as a competitor advantage, first mover advantage, and lose it when others actually catch up. There is always a tussle between this, and it is something that one needs to be mindful, because we have seen, especially in MSMEs, that there is a certain kind of devotion to acquisition of intellectual property, which may sometimes be very expensive resource wise for a relatively small organization, and may not be necessary. And they kind of like feel that if we were not to actually acquire all these intellectual properties that we've generated statutorily, we are in some way letting ourselves down. That is not true. What one actually has to do is what works for you today, because if intellectual property is tied into rate of innovation, you're going to have your day tomorrow and you might be better placed. Effectively, we come down to shelf life of an innovation. All innovation has shelf life. There might be some that might have long shelf life, but I think in the healthcare space, we are looking at pretty short shelf lives. Anything which is electronically, being driven, and that includes computers and software and things, they seem to now have even shorter shelf lives than ever. So you don't miss the boat. You just play it smart. This is something that touched upon, is implementing confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements, is basically making not only persons outside the environment, when you're sharing information, for let's say, for example, with a view to, uh, get custom from putative customers, you have to disclose what is it that you do, and some of that might and some of the customers might actually want to know actually technically how you are achieving certain results, or is it just a claim, not properly founded in engineering. In those kinds of situations and things, when you're actually letting out your intellectual capital into third party hands, you should be very, very careful, and have, non-disclosure agreements and other kinds of agreements in place. Likewise, within the enterprise, I think awareness amongst employees is a really important thing. And we've just seen so much litigation happen around this. Right now, three. I'm doing three of them. Um, uh, when one talks about establishing a comprehensive IP strategy, like I said, it is not static. It is a way of thinking about on how you're going to maximize your resources to move forward. Engineering is more important than going ahead and spending a lot of money in getting one patent in 30 countries, which is going to be extremely expensive. And so that is how it could be today, but tomorrow it might be exactly the opposite. So one has to actually, when one is looking at IP as a part of your survival and thriving, strategy, one has to kind of look at it on what is relevant to me today or in the near future. No further, like I said, because you yourself as an enterprise will move remarkably forward, especially in this space, in terms of what you're going to start off with. Today, you're going to look extremely different 4 or 5 years down the line. Then there are, certain, more technical downstream considerations, like when one is going ahead and taking a patent or, taking a design or something like that, then do your homework. Don't jump into it, because we have very often a situation in which the inventor thinks that I'm the first one to think about it, when actually, when you go and look at literature around, one finds that, oh, many people have been thinking, and long before I was thinking about it, or they've been thinking in the same space. So there is a certain amount of caution one needs to actually, apply when actually going ahead and committing oneself to large expenditures. Then there are some, common pitfalls. I would rather say some of them are bad practices more than pitfalls, but there are, a lot of bad behavior you will find in the intellectual property space. And this has basically got to do with, rather than, it's actually a two-pronged strategy. Part one of the strategy being we're going to innovate and move forward. Part two of the strategy, we're going to frustrate the competition. And that's where issues such as evergreening arise. Different kinds of barriers to competition arise. All sorts of anti-competitive behavior arises, and so on and so forth. It is some of those things that you need to be aware of, but I don't think it is something that as an MSME one actually needs to become, so it cannot be a part of your central way of thinking about your engineering, your products, your solutions, and intellectual property in general. So in the healthcare space, there are several ethical considerations that actually one needs to keep in mind. Now, the most important of them, to my mind, is the patient is like how Balaji said, patient has to be in the center of things. The patient needs to know, and the patient needs to know what you're doing, what you're going to do with the data, how is the data going to be used. Number one, for the patient self, and number two, how it's going to be used and what else is going to be stored, for as a part of your database. So, patient autonomy and informed consent is really, really important, I think. The flip side of it is not so much, because it's an ethical problem, and could also become a legal problem. But the reason why I'm saying this is very important as an ethical consideration is if one actually gets, a reputational hit in the market on account of bad practices adopted, it is guaranteed that all the competitive edge that you have gained will be lost. Another very interesting thing that I find is fairness and removing biases in algorithmic outcomes. It probably takes more time to actually, develop, a wide enough database taking all sorts of demographics into account so as to remove biases and things. But it is one of those things that one might want to do, not actually pick up data from fewer sources, let's say fewer hospitals, but perhaps more, and along all sorts of, demographic delineations. There is, of course, that patient-clinician relationship, which needs to be this thing that, like, look, you have to let them know that, in doing this, you are to stand to gain in a particular fashion. But your confidentiality with respect to the diagnosis or whatever is going to be otherwise, have the same level as doctor-patient confidentiality safeguards.
I did just one more comment.
Oh, are we running out of time?
We are running out of time, so.
Oh, okay, fine. So okay, I could move
quickly for the next couple of slides.
Right, I could possibly leave this thing. I think, okay, so we could probably do a little bit of best practices, as far as intellectual property is concerned.
Sure.
Okay. Do not disclose your ideas through publications, presentations, or even through oral disclosures prior to filing a patent application. Sounds obvious, but the number of times that we have seen that, the novelty in an invention has been destroyed only because people spoke about it. And there's an easier way to understand this. It's called bragging. If you do something cool, you want to talk about it, and who are going to understand what you're doing is your peer group in competitive firms. And then you find, oh, but they're also now doing the same thing 4 months down the line. And we've seen this in some pretty competitive fields, like fiber optics and stuff like that. It has devastating effects on business and to the persons. Do not copy paste content from any source without proper identification. Plagiarism has become a big thing. The same thing goes for software program and so on and so forth. Do not do that ever. Do not provide information that is not true or accurate. Providing false information can have serious consequences. This has got to do with your regulatory environment. It's also got to do with your patent disclosures. When people figure that out, wrongful disclosure is actually one of the grounds on which your patent can be revoked. Maintain strict confidentiality of proprietary information. Do not seek IP advice from a person who is not authorized by your organization. So that is basically how I would say, if one were to look at it at an enterprise level, one can look at these broad principles and begin to actually build up an IP understanding, which always will have to be founded in only as a consequence to engineering and innovation philosophy. Questions?
We'll just take a couple of minutes to take questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and drop your questions. In the meantime, I'll just ask the question if you're there. Earlier, when Balaji was talking, I just mentioned that on the regulatory aspect, I would still ask you a question. So,
Sure.
especially with your experience in different industries, particularly healthcare and maybe BFSI also, the regulatory aspect becomes even more stringent. How do you see that in the IP landscape?
Intellectual property and regulation that way are actually separated out in the sense that the regulatory environment basically says what you can or cannot let into the market, you know, and intellectual property is basically I have done something, but which is not necessarily something that can be let out in the market. So, which is why your intellectual property, statutory environment is actually separated out from your regulatory environment. In pharmaceutical and healthcare, you can make a device, you can make a molecule, you can actually get a patent or a design on the device or a patent on the molecule. Okay. But that does not mean that you are now okay to go to the market with it. You still have to go to drug controller or you have to go to, other authorities to actually have it standard cleared, and vetted for, whether there's any mischief to be caused, whether it's safe and so all safety standards. So the intellectual property and regulatory environment actually run parallel. And the only overlap that actually comes is that if you actually have intellectual property protection over a device or over a molecule that you're actually going to introduce into the market, then they actually ask for a disclosure of that so that they know.
That's perfect. Sorted out. I also wanted to check if can you throw some light on what ethical frameworks you would suggest for this cross section of AI, computer science, code, which is not exactly patentable directly. So what could you suggest based on some examples that you would have seen of live cases without disclosing the confidentiality, of course.
Right. Okay. So this is firstly, what is under controversy as of this point of time? Kavya, is not so much whether these are patentable or not patentable. The question is whether AI generated inventions are patentable. AI itself is. We did our first case of AI in about 2006 or 8, on neural networks and things. And since then, we've been doing that, and we're doing that on an everyday basis. So using neural networks, large learning models, and so on and so forth to actually generate a useful end is patentable. So I would say that if one were to look at it, more in the AI space right now is patentable than that part which is not. So removing that to a side, the ethical considerations in all of these are pretty much the same ethical considerations that you would have found in an analog environment, except massively amplified. And most of them relate to issues around integrity, patient confidentiality, and integrity of the maintenance of the data within an enterprise, how the enterprise holds it, okay, and data sharing. Those are the biggest concerns, and they're identical in the pre-AI stage. The only thing is just kind of like just get over amplified and things. In the, I think in the healthcare space, when it comes to medical devices, all these monitoring devices and things, and the claims that they make, okay, I think that's a very serious consideration. You know, um, let's say, for example, also let's say the diagnostics that they can actually make. You know, how much is one supposed to actually rely upon them, or is it supposed to be an indicia for you to go and check and things of the sort? There are many devices like this now in the market. We are working with a lot of them, where they do some extraordinary things. They will tell you about every ailment or every irregularity, you know, um, and the manner in which those data have been developed, and those databases against which they actually benchmark have changed a lot. I have seen that happen in the last 3 or 4 years. Effectively moving to databases that are better exemplars of the base level readings, and therefore, making better diagnostics of it. Basically, then that begs the question, why are things not said too much about, uh, the reading itself on how accurate they are? But they cross the regulatory and the regulatory framework. So the question really becomes, I mean, how far do you have to be? Do you have to actually cross it, or do you have to be honest? And if you have to be honest, then how are you going to say this? So I guess every enterprise will actually have to take that into consideration. There are also lawsuits that actually might follow as a result of it. I mean, maybe not in India at first, but I can see it in the future. Okay, where when very tall claims have been laid. Okay, and then there's going to be a lawsuit as a result of a failure, um, uh, on what a particular device or other thing had been promised to be able to deliver.
Thanks for that explanation also there. I think there are no questions, and we have also overshot time. So I think we'll end the webinar right now. Thank you so much again, Dev, for joining us. Balaji also had a hard stop, so he has left the call as well. So thank you to both of you for joining us and sharing your insights. I'll again forward any questions that we receive on the legalities or any aspects regarding that to you in case we get. We hope to see you again in some other session, and thanks to all the participants also who joined in today. We will keep you posted on the next session that comes up in the series. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavya. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Do let us know if there anything comes along that you want assistance on. We'll be happy to, do that as a part of our engagement with you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.